Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone. I'm just going to walk you through commodities. And the reason why I want to have a discussion because commodities drive a lot of different aspects of the economy. The commodities typically are the raw materials go into products such as automotive vehicles. They go into the fruit production cycle for your loaf of bread that's made out of wheat, rye, or barley. So basically, it gives you a kind of an idea where costs are going, and plus around the focus in terms of capital spending and just the overall performance of the oil, oil and gas sector, mining, that's metal, non-metal. It's getting into forestry. It's getting into agriculture. So here's an introduction. Here's my agenda. I'll do an introduction. I'll go through commodities at a high level, and I'll talk through a few of the issues. Here's a bio about myself. I'm a CPA, CGA, so I'm a professional accountant by trade. So I've spent balanced time between corporate reporting, financial analysis, and driving business change and profitability and overall return on shareholder value as a financial analyst, as a senior accountant. But for the last 20 years, I've been basically a financial solution expert, which I use macro and micro data as part of driving better results for my clients and prospects. So if you look at this slide, you're seeing that it was a rough month for commodities in general, with the majority in decline. And that's to do with the threat of the global recession, slow economic growth, just overall geopolitical issues driving things, low adoption of EV due to many factors, and I'll get into that later. But you're seeing a pattern. This gives you a very high level view of where they're projecting things. And if you look at crude oil, we're way off where we were a few months ago when it was close to almost $90 a barrel. And even natural gas has been up and down like a yo-yo, just on its overall prices, and that's significant. And wheat too as well. And wheat and corn are important because they play a key role in the overall food chain. But this kind of gives you an idea. And in the far right, you're looking at aluminum, copper, nickel. Why am I raising nickel, aluminum, copper? Because they're all critical part of this net transition to net zero in the overall way we're looking at climate change and managing emissions, and just the products require metals to basically drive that change. Oil production here gives you a kind of an idea too that oil production had a decline in August. Some of it in Canada's cases, they scaled back some oil production due to the fact that they had some wildfires in areas that were near the oil sands, so they scaled it back. And even with an active hurricane season, which is typically in July and August as well, we've seen a scale back of production. This is a good slide. Now, this is Canada, but in general, I'm seeing this in EMEA as well as around the world. EV adoption is still a challenge through many factors. One is the infrastructure itself, the cost of vehicles. Not the maintenance as much, it's more the overall cost. And people are trying to look at that and make decisions on that. And that's forcing automotive companies to pivot around what they do. So they've scaled back some of their investments in EV batteries. They're pivoting more back to internal combustion engines as well as hybrids. The green transition, I brought this up because a lot of it is dependent on scope 2 emissions, which is basically the energy management. I use Hydro-Quebec because typically with Hydro-Quebec, they generate a bulk of their power from hydro, and they're just showing you how much this is going to cost them over. Now, any sort of capital investment along with the operational costs have to be picked up as part of the overall rates. So depending on how this capital is allocated, they'll have to get approval for rates, but this gives you an indication of how hydro rates likely will be impacted by the change and transition of that. So we're already seeing where inflation has been struggling to get to the target rate of 2%, which I still don't think is realistic, but that's not for me to hear to say, that's just my opinion. Food costs you can't avoid. This kind of gives you an idea what's going with the agricultural side. There's a lot of conversation around the greed inflation because it's easy to play politics on that. But the reality is this: there's a lot of factors that go into from the time you plant it to the time it's taken from there, processed, and then eventually gets to stores to the consumer. There's costs passed along the line that need to be addressed, and some of it's to do with the overall climate change policies. Some of it's to do with the alternative options that more people are going to vegetarian. But there's pressure on food costs that still has not been resolved. Now, I'd like to talk about briefly on the slides here. So this kind of gives you some idea. Like I talked a bit about oil production, that it's been up and down and due to a lot of the Chinese demand. LNG is still seeing significant amount of investment, especially in Qatar, Australia, and the U.S. Canada is in the close to having one plant up and running, but they've kind of put more focus on green hydrogen, which you'll see with bullet point 4. Lithium, a lot of it's been scaled back due to low demand, and there's significant challenges with lithium. Like oil gets a lot of focus around the emissions, but lithium and other mining practices have to be sustainable around water, just around the tailing ponds, and just how we restore the land after these operations is critical. Green hydrogen is still in its infancy stages in terms of becoming viable technology and cost affordable. Uranium is up and down because there's more focus on small nuclear reactors as part of the over net zero. Uranium has its own environmental footprint that has to be is a concern. Iron ore, the reason I raise that is steel producers are looking at moving to green steel, which requires a higher grade of iron ore, which is found in places like Canada has significant, but it's a challenge to get them because some of their biggest supply of higher grade iron ore is in the Baffin Island, and you can imagine with harsh winters, and just extracting that and getting it to market is critical. Farming income has been up and down, and a lot of it's to do with the higher cost. Commodity prices have come down a bit, so their margins are getting tighter. Cobalt, I just put this in because it's a critical product, and we've seen wide swings with it. It's critical in terms of the energy and overall smartphones and everything else required to drive to the net zero transition. I talked about EV adoption has been slow, and I can't end the conversation with really talking about ESG mandates, with the majority of the focus being on emissions. But we're seeing tighter rules around biodiversity and um, human rights practices as part of European mandates. So there's a lot of things. It's a moving target, and what's happening. And for example, in Australia, is their mandates coming out now more on the emission side. But I cannot overemphasize that the overall ESG reporting cycle goes beyond just emissions. It's your social governance, it's your facility management, it's your water, it's your scope 1, 2, 3, and even scope 4, which is the products now. So it's something to bear in mind when you're having discussions with your clients, is to kind of get a lay of the land. Here's some additional contact information. I write blogs. You're more apt to find me on LinkedIn. Message me if I can be of assistance. I've done over 300 data AI deployments over the last 8 years. I also have a solid background in doing business transformations and in working with numbers in general because I am account by trade. But this presentation was to give you some insight of what's going on with commodities, and I hope it assists you as you're planning out your journey with your clients or your businesses. Thank you.